Hello and welcome back to the Linux Panic YouTube channel. In this video, I'm actually going to be taking a quick divergence away from the normal, and actually take on and dispel some of the myths about Linux for people who are new to using Linux. Just want to give you a face-to-face. Also, hello, if you've not seen this yet, I'm Nick, and before we move on to the video, I would like to thank my channel members. Those are Mislav, the Storm of the Zero, Bedex, Von Garden, King Crafter Oda, Barrett Tup. I've absolutely butchered that. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, mate. And I'd also like to thank Mislav once again for thanking me on buymeacoffee.com. I'll leave a link to that in the description. Yes, I'm thanking you again, even though I know you don't like. No, you don't want. I know it's not something you require, Mislav, but I do it anyway. Let's get into the video now. When people hear the word Linux, they automatically think, it's going to be nothing but toxic people. Meh. Well, no, not necessarily. It depends on people themselves and their willingness to assist. Now, if you're here, then you know I'm quite happy. I'll quite happily assist. If you're new here, hi, I do this, and I've been doing it for nearly 2 years now, and I love to help. And I just want to make Linux as easy as I can for you. There are, within every community, no matter where you go, no matter what community it is, there's always at least a small sector of a community that is toxic. Whether that is to do with Windows, Linux, Mac OS, cars, guns, fishing, boating, anything. There will always be at least some toxic sect within that community. Now, within the Linux community, you've got like the base operating systems such as Debian, you've got Arch, you've got Fedora as the bases, and then you've got like the offshoots of it. So from Arch, you've got Manjaro, Asahi, Maybox, you've got anything that runs Pac-Man is again a base. You've got people who run Gen 2, you've got people who run Ubuntu who absolutely would die on their own sword if it came to it, because they don't see anything but Ubuntu. Forgetting that Ubuntu is built on Debian. You've got people who will absolutely, if you don't use Debian, will just call you out and say, you don't deserve, you're not good because you don't use Debian. There's always at least a small subset of people who will always be poisonous to the greater cause. All it takes is for one bad apple to spoil the cart. Now, there are some toxic communities, yeah, but as a whole, Linux users just want more people to be using it. There will never be a year of the Linux desktop. I've always said this. It will just get to the point where the popularity of Linux just is going to be a linear growth. It's going to get to a point where we go, when did Linux get so ubiquitous? And we won't know. We won't know when. It's just slowly uphill. We'll get there eventually. Although Linux does run like 75 to 90% of the internet as is. If you're watching this, it's more than likely gone through a Linux device, which this here is. Linux is hard to use. No, Linux is not hard to use at all. What operating system you choose to use and how you choose to use it depends on the difficulty. Now, for like an easy operating system to start off with, something like Debian or Ubuntu or Mint or Fedora, if you really want to, you want open for a little bit of a challenge. There are easy operating systems to use and there are hard operating systems to use. Hard ones to use would be most certainly Arch, because you have to install it manually and go through the process. I've made a few videos on that you can find underneath the Arch playlist. It's not that hard to install. Knowing how to use it, that's the hard part. Right, so I can understand that. Then there's the assumption that Linux is buggy and it's not going to work. That's not necessarily true. Yes, whilst Linux does not have as many mainstream tools developed for it, and bits of software such as Photoshop or any Photoshop suite or Adobe or anything like that, it's not buggy. It does work. It is functional. The only time it's buggy is either user error or something just hasn't been developed quite right. Now, as is the case with a lot of bits of hardware, and I'll use a printer for example, I have access to a printer that's currently plugged in downstairs. It's connected wirelessly, and right now my computer's going, okay, I want to print to that printer. I can see that printer. I can see it's turned on. I can see it's functional. That's one of the reasons why Linux is good, because it can actually see my printer downstairs, connected wirelessly. Because bear in mind, my computer was wired into Ethernet, and that printer is downstairs wireless. It can see the computer, it can see the printer, and just go, okay, I'm going to print to it, and it'll print. No extra software or anything like that. It's because the support for it is already built into the kernel. If you've seen my Linux from scratch videos or live streams, you will see the amount of stuff that goes into Linux, the amount of hardware drivers that you can come across. A lot of it is already built in, unless it's like super specialist bits of hardware. If you plug something into a Linux computer, Linux is just going to go, hello, and pick it straight up and start working. Now, if it's not, and you can get the driver, you can just compile that into the kernel. You can just remake it yourself. Whereas with Windows, if you have something that isn't supported, you then got to disable, you've then got to enable unsecure signing of, you then got to enable the installing of unsecured drivers, and then that might not work. And if it doesn't work, you then got to backtrack and just more often than not, if you want something and you can get a hold of it, you can just put it in yourself and it'll work. So Linux isn't buggy and it does work. It just depends on your implementation. Now, for kernel panic from scratch, my Linux operating system, a little bit buggy because that's the way that I've made it by mistake. But that's my problem because I made it that way. And moving on to the argument that there is no software support. There is software support. We have Valve to thank for absolutely hammering home Linux and just their constant development of Linux tools, such as Proton. Games that we thought were never possible to be able to run on Linux, for example, will run on Linux just fine, mainly because of the Steam Deck handheld. But we have people to thank, like people who make Flatpak and people who make Wine HQ. They make Wine. Wine stands for Wine is not an emulator. It just provides a translation layer between the Windows commands, the Windows inputs, and gives it a Linux output. Basically, so if it says something in Windows, it translates it into Linux, into something that Linux operating system can understand. They make a really powerful bit of kit. They make a really powerful tool that just works when you want it to. Like, yeah, it'll say if it needs to install something, and if it doesn't run, then that's just the way that the software's made. But there is software support. The open source community that is behind Linux as a whole is amazing. I make install scripts for the stuff that I do. I do update them, not as frequently as I probably could do, but it's that just the stuff that I make alone has helped people no end. The stuff that you may end up making one day yourself can help people might end up helping people no end. The open source community within Linux is such a large factor about what we do. Without them, we might not be where we are. But there is plenty of software support, and if there isn't support for what you want to use, then there's probably an alternative bit of software. Like, for example, I can't get DaVinci Resolve to work. mainly because I don't run CentOS. But you know what I do use? I use Shotcut. I spent some time searching for video editing software for Linux, and I find Shotcut. It's genuinely called Shotcut, and it works without hassle. Does what I need to do. I love it. I couldn't find what I wanted, so you know what? I found another bit of software. You know what? That bit of software, it works. It's amazing. And then there's just the, oh, well, Linux will never be popular. It's never going to work. It'll always break. Linux has been around since, if I remember correctly, 1994, 93, 94. It's been around for a very long time. We have seen the kernel gone from infancy to ruling the internet as the main backbone behind the internet. It rules most of the enterprise space. If you're seeing this video, it's gone through so many different Linux providers and services and what have you to get to this point, to get to appearing on your particular screen. Windows, for example, yeah, like people who use the Windows services and all that, but they forget one key thing. Windows is a closed-off clone of Mac OS. And you're probably wondering, what do I mean? Years and years and years ago, back in the 80s and 90s, back when Steve Jobs was CEO for the first time around, he gave Gates access to an Apple computer and said, here, you can look at it. And then Microsoft cloned Apple OS X original, well, not OS 2, one of their original, I believe it's the Apple II. They cloned that. I could be wrong, please correct me in the comments, but they cloned it. So there's always been some level of Apple inside Windows. Windows has always been something else other than itself. But that's the thing with Linux. If you want it to be something else, you can make it something else. There's a whole community around Linux saying, okay, well, if you want to make it something else, we'll help you. I'll help you. My Linux installation looks like Windows XP because I like the look, and I've made that available. It looks amazing. I love this. But because I love it doesn't mean you might love it. You might hate it, and you might want something else. You might want your desktop to look like Windows 7 or Windows 92 or 5 even. Why? Technically, Windows 92 would be DOS 3.1, maybe. Don't quote me on that one. I can't remember. But it's the fact that with this community that we have a wide-ranging just library of support. We have easy to use software. It works. It's supported by really rather large names, as begrudgingly as we say, IBM, CentOS, Red Hat. As begrudgingly as we say it, we have the Linux community has the support of IBM. International Business Machines is still existing somehow. We also have the support of how many hundreds of thousands, if not how many hundreds of thousands of developers, into the millions of developers. People like me and you, and the stuff that one person makes might well be holding up the internet. There probably is just one guy somewhere, one person somewhere, just updating something every so often. That's just keeping the internet going. And because of that, we don't know. But it's just the small stuff. Like Linux is not hard to use. It's not buggy. It's not broken. There is software support, and it will never just break unless you're Linus Tech Tips, Linus Sebastian, or me. If you're Linus Sebastian or me, it doesn't just break. And more often than not, it'll say, hey, look, what you're doing is dumb, but we'll let you do it anyway. Sudo rm-rf no preserve root. That. Anyway, that's just that's my little rant over. I just wanted to give you like a different perspective on what I'm doing. And yeah, I know this looks dodgy. I think I still need to figure out FFmpeg, because 640 by 482, I think this is doing. 640 by 424. This is not the resolution of 640 by 424, so I need to figure that one out. That's why I might look a bit stretched, because if I just fit to screen instead of stretch, it'll fix itself. Where is transform? Reset. And if I do transform fit to screen, yeah, see that looks different. I'll just put that back to the stretch to screen. Thanks, OBS. But as a community as a whole, we've done quite well for ourselves, and there's always going to be more. Linux is not hard to use, and it's my goal to help people understand Linux, even at the most basic of levels. I would like to thank you very much for watching. If you're not already subscribed, maybe consider subscribing. If you liked the video, like the like button, yes. If you disliked it, that one works as well. Notification bell also helps, so you get notifications of videos like this one, and also live streams as well, such as Linux from Scratch streams, and also the Factorio streams. You also get notifications of the Tuesday streams as well, with the Retro Rescues. Oh, Tuesday videos, even not streams, with Retro Rescue. Anyway, I have been Nick. You have been amazing. I hope you have a good day, good evening, good night, good whatever it is, wherever you are. And remember, when you use Linux, don't panic. Goodbye.